Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we're looking at Preservation Evoker in terms of should you play. This is going to be an analysis of my overview for Mythic Plus, for raids, in terms of how Preservation Evoker performed, how it felt, was it fun, and should you main the new healer in the next expansion. Now I'm sure many of you are going through the same situation as I am. You're unsure if you should play Evoker. It has a lot of positives and it has some really big negatives that are probably putting you on the fence in terms of, is it going to be good in Mythic Plus? Is it going to be fun? How is the healing? How is the single target? How is the damage? Does it feel fun? What is the mana consumption? And I actually went through a roller coaster of emotions with Evoker. At the start it was released, I was super hyped. There was a lot of copium, it's a new class. There hasn't been a new healing class in a very long time. Everything was new and shiny and I really liked it. Then with time I started to notice that the range limitations, which was initially 25 yards, was kind of creeping up in terms of the big red flags. Is it going to be viable in really spread raid environments? How is it going to perform in really hard Mythic Plus dungeons where everyone is kind of spread? Am I going to be really annoyed by these range limitations? And I started to really kind of see the flags and panic about Evoker, and I made videos about this. And then eventually Blizzard just kind of caved into the feedback from a lot of players, not just me, and they increased the range to 30 yards. They also did a lot of balancing in terms of how the spells feels, how the empowered spells feel. And again, we're going to look at Mythic Plus and raids, because the gameplay, or in terms of the spells that you actually end up using in raid content on Mythic Plus, is very different, or at least for this time being, based on spell balancing. So this is my track there, this is my Preservation Evoker, and the first thing I want to talk about is aesthetics. I know it sounds a little bit weird, but you can only play Tractor as Evoker, and I'm relatively disappointed about the look, the aesthetics. I'm not a huge fan of the walking animation. I think it could be improved in multiple different ways. But for me, this is not a deal breaker. It's only my personal opinion, but I'm really interested in knowing your opinion. Do you like the aesthetics, the looks, the animations that the new race has? Do you think it's appropriate? Do you think it could have been done better? I'm personally not a big fan. But again, let's look at Mythic Plus, let's look at gameplay and what is special, or what makes Evoker special or different compared to other healers. So this is the talent build that I run in Mythic Plus. I actually think this is probably, I think this is a pretty popular talent build right now. I think there's a lot of emphasis on reversion. Reversion is your hot. It's not just a heal over time ability, it has a specific, when reversion critically heals, its duration is increased. So it has a special component to it. There is a lot of emphasis on this because your tier set, 2 set and 4 set bonus relies on this. So having double charges I think is important. Having things like Grace Period, your healing is increased by 10% on targets with reversion. I think these talents are going to be, I think they're going to gain in value because of your tier set. Now, what makes Preservation Evoker different? You have empowered abilities. You have things like Spirit Bloom, you have things like Dream Breath, and they both have a relatively short cooldown. Spirit Bloom has 20-second cooldown and Dream Breath has 35-second cooldown. Now, Spirit Bloom only has shorter cooldown because if you spec into Spiritual Clarity, which Spirit Bloom's cooldown is reduced by 10 seconds, or by further 10 seconds. So these abilities, these empowered abilities, is basically what's new with the class. Outside of the range limitations, again, it's 30 yards for the time being. But this is something new. On top of that, you have Echoes. And Echoes is something like Discipline Priest, Atonements, but something a little bit different. So it does have, I do have to mention, so you have a 30-yard range, and you can apply, you have 30-yard range in order to apply your Echoes. And you can apply Echoes on a person, and then, for example, they run out of your range, and you're like, okay, I can't heal them. I can't heal, I can't do anything. The fact that you can proc Echoes, let's say I'm gonna cast Dream Breath, look at the Echoes cast right here, it procs. So the fact that you can proc Echoes outside of that range is another way to min-max your healing, because there will be moments when people are going to be outside of your range, you can't heal them, but if you put Echoes on them while they were within your range, you can actually still heal them, and that kind of brings the min-maxy side of this healer. And this is why it's called advanced, or maybe this is why Blizzard put an advanced warning to it. Now let's go back to those empowered abilities. You have multiple empowered abilities because you also have DPS empowered abilities like Fire Breath. The fact that these empowered abilities heal for so much in Mythic Plus is just, it's wild. You have 20-second cooldown on Spirit Bloom and it heals for so much, comparable to something like 3-minute cooldown for other healers. So other healers have these 3 minutes on these big AoE heals, and you have 20-second cooldown and 35-second cooldown on something equivalent to that in Mythic Plus content. You also have to remember that in Mythic Plus content, for a lot of healers who have those 3-minute cooldowns, they don't scale on group size and they don't feel that impactful in Mythic Plus like they do in something like large raid groups. I'm saying that these abilities are insanely overpowered, they heal for so much. You are required to cast them for a long time. You have to stay stationary. That's one of the big deals. you have abilities like hover to move around, and when you use hover, you can use your heals. You can use things like echoes, you can use things like living flame, but you cannot cast your empowered abilities. So there is a stationary and casting requirement to your big empowered abilities, but if you can pull it off, they're going to be insanely strong in something like Mythic Plus content when you're trying to top up everyone from the brink of death. So that's one of the big positives for me. Empowered abilities feel really strong, especially in something like Mythic Plus content where you can hit everyone and it just feels really strong. Again, we'll talk about the raid very, very soon. Another thing that is really, really important for me is dealing damage. If you play a healer in Shadowlands, you know that the meta towards healer damage has changed a lot. In Season 3, there was a huge emphasis on healer damage in Mythic Plus. In Season 4, there was more emphasis on healing. But you always have to deal damage in the downtime as a healer, especially in high-end content if you want to try and time those Mythic Plus keys. But not all healers are made equal. A lot of healers don't get anything out of dealing damage in terms of healing. A lot of healers, for example, Resto Druid in something like Raid environment, they can apply Moonfire, Sunfire, they can go into Kitty form and do DPS, but they're not going to get anything out of it in terms of improving their healing. Now, Evoker or Preservation Evoker does. I think it's very important for healers to get something out of dealing damage. It's all great to deal damage and provide DPS in 5-mans and raids, but I think every healer should get something in return in terms of healing. That's the way I think every healer should be designed, and I think Evoker has a bunch of these things. First of all, you have things like Scarlet Adaptation, you have things like Leaping Flames. Just to showcase Leaping Flames, it is a little bit difficult as a solo person, but if you cast your Fire Breath, and the longer you cast it, the more empowered, again, it's going to be stronger. And then you're, based on your empowered levels, your Leaping Flames, which again, your Leaping Flames can be used to DPS and heal. It's something like Penance if you're playing Discipline Priest. Your Leaping Flames can be used to, for example, heal, and it's going to splash heal based on empowered level. And that is most likely going to proc things like Essence Burst, where Living Flame has 20% chance to make your next Essence ability free, stacks up to 2 times, which means that you can probably use something like Disintegrate. Now, Disintegrate costs 3 essences, and you have this essence system where you're basically using your essences, aka healing, into DPS. Now, if you get Essence Burst from that combo, it's going to be free, so you don't even have to worry about it, but Disintegrate is going to be a channeled ability that deals damage, and it's going to give you mana if you spec into talents like Energy Loop. And I honestly feel Energy Loop is pretty important both in Mythic Plus and raids, because that puts you in control of your mana. Now, this is the second positive thing that I really enjoy about Preservation Evoker: mana. You are basically responsible for how much mana you're going to get, because you're responsible for how many Disintegrates you're going to use, both in Raid and Mythic Plus environments. I genuinely feel that even without this talent in Mythic Plus, Preservation Evoker would not have many mana issues, but in Raid situations where we'll talk about the possible Raid build or possible talents, there is a big emphasis on managing your mana, and Disintegrate feels really, really good. There are certain healers, especially in raid environments, where they rely on Innervate, and I really don't like that. I don't like relying on other people for my healer performance, and I think Evoker is going to be one of those healers where, hey, you have a lot of mana issues because you're not running or using Disintegrate properly with Energy Loop, or you have no mana issues because you're playing right, you're managing your healing abilities, you're managing your Disintegrate, and the fact that Disintegrate gives you damage also is a huge plus. And these are some of the positives, and they're not really specific to Mythic Plus, they're specific to all the content in raids and Mythic Plus. You can get mana back from Disintegrate, you can deal damage and get healing. Again, we didn't really talk about the fact that you get things like Life Giver's Flame. Fire Breath heals a nearby injured ally for 80% of the damage done up to 5 targets. So there is multiple talents here that incentivize you to deal damage, and that's going to give you mana back or heal people. And I think every healer should have some sort of talents that do that. And this is why I think Preservation Evoker is something that I'm really leaning towards. Now, let's go and talk about raid and possible raid environments or builds. Again, this is my Mythic Plus build. It's not something that I used in raid environments, because in raid environments, again, I'm not going to talk about or cover my exact raiding build, because I think there's going to be certain changes. Blizzard is still changing. But again, I did run Stasis, but let's say you have to put in points for this raiding build to Temporal Anomaly, and I think this is really important. So Temporal Anomaly is an ability. Again, I'm going to press it right now. I'm going to activate it, changing talents. It's something that I've seen a lot of logs use. It's something that I used, and the reason why it's so strong is because it gives you absorbs. Sends forward the Vortex of Temporal Anomaly, absorbing damage on 2 nearby allies for a certain amount, lasts a certain amount, and then you can have Resonating Sphere where Temporal Anomaly applies echoes. So you can use this orb, and it is an orb that you send out, that's going to apply echoes and it's going to apply absorbs, and it can be used for ramps basically. And this is something, again, I talked about this. I did a bit of raid testing. A lot of people were either just spamming this and using Disintegrate to get mana back, or they were using it sparingly in order to, how do I say, create a more powerful ramp. So I'm not sure what the proper gameplay is going to be, because Temporal Anomaly costs a bunch of mana and you cannot really spam it throughout the whole fight without having to use Disintegrate with energy loot. So the gameplay for raid is probably going to be a little bit different, because we'll have to see how this is going to be balanced. I did do raid testing for Heroic. I didn't get to test Evoker in Mythic yet. I was testing another healers. So I'm not sure how this is going to work in like a really hardcore Mythic raiding environment where people are really taking big damage. I initially was kind of running the whole Emerald Blossom build, where you spec into Emerald Blossoms, Floating Seedlings, Field of Dreams, Circle of Life. Circle of Life is getting changed in the next build, so it'll be interesting to check it out. We'll have to see if the green build is going to make a comeback in raid. So I'm not 100% certain about the possible raid gameplay for Evoker in terms of, hey, maybe you're going to go the green build, maybe you're going to go Temporal Anomaly, maybe you're going to use Temporal Anomaly a lot, or maybe you're just going to use it during your kind of ramping builds, or maybe you're going to spam it and just use Disintegrate to get your mana back. There's a lot of different cheesabilities or cheesable ways of achieving good HPS, especially in Heroic raid where there's not a lot of AoE damage happening, which might be very different from Mythic environment. So just to cover and summarize the whole video for you, there's multiple positives for Evoker. I talked only about the positives. I talked about the fact that empowered abilities, they do feel really strong, especially in Mythic Plus environments, because they heal for so much. They feel equivalent to something like a 3-minute cooldown that other healers have. Because you have to remember, a lot of the other healer 3-minute cooldowns do not scale in Mythic Plus, which is just, again, it's really weird. Empowered abilities feel really cool. You're a relatively mobile healer. I won't say you're the most mobile healer out of all the healers. I don't think you should be. A lot of people are saying, hey, Evoker should be 30 yards or 25 yards or whatever yards because it's so mobile. There's actually quite a few other healers that are equal in terms of the mobility if it's used properly. So I don't think Evoker should be punished for mobility or their mobility being over exaggerated. I do think they're mobile. I like the hover ability. I like the fact that hover can be used, or you can heal during hover. Again, you can't cast your empowered abilities. I like the fact that you are rewarded for dealing damage with multiple different nodes and talent builds, where dealing damage is going to give you healing. I think, or mana back. I think that's really cool. And that brings me to another point. You are responsible for your mana. That is really, really awesome. I'm not reliant on innovates. If I need mana, I'm gonna use my essences, which is kind of like losing your HPS, to get mana back, which feels, honestly, I feel like every healer should also have capabilities like that. Now, some of the negatives to finish off the video. The range limitations. I'm still very scared about certain bosses, both in Mythic Plus and Raid, where people are going to be really, really spread. I'm not sure if the range is going to be so annoying that I'm gonna start hating the healer. This is my fear. There's going to be a certain fight in Mythic Raid where we're spending like 200, 300 pulls and it's all spread, and I have to play this healer, and I'm playing this healer, and I'm starting to hate this healer because I have to spend 200 wipes on a boss where everyone's spread, and I'm hating my life. That's my main fear of this range limitation that Preservation Evoker has. I think it could be improved. I think the range limitation could be actually moved up to what other healers have, but I'm not sure if Blizzard is going to go with it. Another thing that I might be a little bit scared about is on-demand single target healing, and you do have ways to deal with it. For example, if I'm running with a tank in Mythic Plus content, I always apply reversion on them. If I have 2 stacks, I use echoes, and then I use reversion again, and then the tank has 2 hots on them. So this kind of allows me to provide a buffer for tank healing, and they always feel a little bit safer, because if they take spike damage, the 2 hots will heal them up. If they crit, they also get extended. So I think that's a cool way of providing consistent single target healing. But in terms of providing on-demand single target healing, you do have things like Verdant Embrace. It used to be called Rescue, but I'm a little bit scared if someone needs consistent single target healing all of the time, and how I deal with that. And we'll have to see how that's going to shape out, specifically in Mythic Plus content. That's something that I think needs to be talked about. I did go through the roller coaster of emotions with Preservation Evoker in terms of, hey, they were first released, I was super excited, then I got scared about the range, then I got, again, they increased the range to 30 yards, they might increase the range further, we'll have to see. You also have to consider this is a new class. If Preservation Evoker or Evoker is going to be really underplayed or doing really poorly, there is a high chance that Blizzard is going to buff this class, because it is the new class of the expansion. I don't think Blizzard wants the new flagship class to be underperforming or be viewed as really bad. And that's another thing for the people who are chasing the meta. I think Blizzard will always make sure this class is at least above average, if not top. I hope this video has helped you in terms of determining whether you should play Evoker. Again, there is going to be possibly different gameplay for Mythic Plus and Raids in terms of talents, but that is still going to be determined by spell balancing. I do think that in terms of performance for Mythic Plus and Raids, Evoker did pretty well, and I did talk about the new class syndrome, where Blizzard doesn't want the new class to underperform. I think that's going to be true for Evoker in the future as well. Personally, for me, Evoker is one of the front runners for a new class to main in the next expansion. We'll have to see how the balancing is going to work out, but I think there is a lot of positives that I enjoy about the class. We talked about the healing, we talked about the empowered abilities, we talked about things like managing your mana and dealing damage that also increases your healing. I think these three positives are going to be pretty big in terms of helping me to determine which class I'm going to main. Guys, I really want to know how you feel about the Evoker. Are you going to play Evoker? I haven't tried out Devastation Evoker yet, but it is relatively undertuned, and I think it's going to get buffs in the near future. But let me know which class you're maining, and is it Preservation Evoker?